eggs sizzled softly in the pan, filling the kitchen with a familiar scent of butter and rosemary. Isabel moved with practiced rhythm, 2 over-easy eggs, sourdough toast, sliced avocado on the side. She poured the coffee exactly as Jonah liked it, strong and black, no sugar. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, catching in her auburn hair as she plated everything with quiet care. It was a morning like any other. Except it wasn't. Jonah sat at the kitchen island, head bowed over his phone. His fingers moved rapidly, scrolling, tapping, smiling faintly at something she couldn't see. She placed the plate in front of him, waiting for that moment, just a second, for him to look up and say thank you, or offer a soft smile, or at the very least nod. Nothing. His thumbs didn't even pause. Isabel took her seat across from him and forced herself to eat, one small bite at a time. The toast tasted like cardboard. The silence stretched thin between them, taut and vibrating. Not a single word passed between them. Only the occasional clink of her fork and the low buzz of his phone. 10 years of marriage, and now breakfast was the sound of a woman eating alone across from the man she still called her husband. She studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. He was still handsome. Sharper now, more lined around the eyes, but the same man she had fallen in love with at 22. Except, she couldn't recognize his face anymore. Not fully. His eyes never met hers lately. And when they did, there was something guarded behind them. Like she was a stranger in his home. Or maybe he was in hers. After he left for work without a goodbye kiss, just a brisk, distracted see you later, Isabel stood at the sink and watched his car pull out of the driveway. Her reflection in the window stared back at her. Lips pressed, spine straight, eyes hollow. That night, while folding laundry in their shared bedroom, Isabel found it. A small, careless slip. Jonah's dress shirt, blue pinstripe, worn to a meeting the day before. As she smoothed it for ironing, she noticed the faint smudge near the collar. Lipstick, a shade she never wore. Dark rose, almost red. She held it under the lamp, brushing her thumb over the stain. It didn't smudge further. It had set. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, shirt in hand, breathing shallow. It wasn't shock that hit her first. It was confirmation, the quiet kind. The kind that arrives not like a slap, but like the closing of a door you never realized had been open. Isabel didn't cry. She didn't scream. She folded the shirt neatly, placed it in the ironing pile, and stared at the closed door of their walk-in closet. Her fingers trembled slightly, but not from weakness. From restraint. The perfect wife would iron it. The perfect wife would pretend. But something in her heart shifted that night. Not loudly, not violently, but undeniably. She looked at the shirt again, then at the mirror. Then, without saying a word, she stood up and made the bed. Tomorrow, she knew, would still come, and so would breakfast. But something between them had broken, quietly, just like everything else. It was nearing dusk when the doorbell rang, its sharp chime echoing through the quiet house. Isabel wiped her hands on a towel, her fingers still damp from trimming the wilting roses out back. She wasn't expecting anyone. Jonah had texted earlier to say he had a late dinner meeting. No details, just 4 words. Don't wait for me. When she opened the door, she froze. There stood Claire, suitcase in hand, her hair longer than Isabel remembered, sun-streaked and wind-blown. She wore an oversized coat and a tired smile. "Hi, Izzy," Claire said softly, like years hadn't passed. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Isabel's eyes scanned her sister's face, familiar but sharper now, older, changed. They hadn't spoken much since their last phone call ended in silence nearly 4 years ago, a conversation filled with half apologies and full misunderstandings. Childhood had bonded them. Adulthood had separated them. Isabel stepped aside. "You're just going to show up like this?" Claire walked in, set her suitcase down near the entry table, and shrugged. "I figured it was time." That night, the 2 sisters sat across from each other at the kitchen table, sipping tea that had gone cold, the silence between them both awkward and oddly comforting. Isabel noticed how Claire's hands shook slightly when she lifted her cup, how her eyes darted around the room like she was cataloging every corner of her sister's life. "So," Claire finally said, "are you happy?" Isabel looked down at her tea. "It's fine, things are fine." Claire didn't respond right away. She tilted her head, studying Isabel the way only an older sister could. "You've lost weight. Busy, I guess. Your smile doesn't reach your eyes." Isabel sighed. "Claire, not tonight, okay?" "I'm not here to fight," Claire said, her voice softer now. I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong." Isabel stood to clear the cups, her back turned. "Everything's just as it's always been." "That's what worries me," Claire said, not moving from her chair. "Don't wait until silence becomes poison. I did that once. I waited too long to leave someone who made me invisible." The room held its breath. Isabel's hand gripped the edge of the sink. She wanted to say, "You don't know anything about my life," but she didn't. Because Claire did know. And worse, she saw through her. Claire stayed in the guest room that night. Isabel lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan slowly spinning, her mind spiraling with questions she had tried not to ask. Was she truly invisible now? Had she handed over too many pieces of herself in the name of keeping the peace? The next morning, Jonah noticed Claire at the breakfast table and raised an eyebrow. Claire only smirked. "Hope you don't mind the surprise." Jonah, as always, recovered quickly. "Of course not. Always room for family." But his jaw tightened when Isabel placed 2 plates on the table and didn't serve his first. Claire saw it. That afternoon, while Jonah was at work, Claire found Isabel out in the garden again, pruning the withered edges of the hydrangeas. "Do you want to talk about it?" Claire asked. Isabel didn't look up. "Talk about what?" "Whoever she is." Isabel's hand stilled. "I don't know her name, just the lipstick color." Claire crouched beside her. "You don't have to endure this. I'm not ready to blow everything up." "Then don't," Claire said. "But start building something else, even if it's just a plan. You don't have to die quietly in someone else's story." For the first time in a long time, Isabel let herself lean into her sister's presence. Maybe they were still scarred. Maybe forgiveness would never be perfect between them. But in this moment, Claire felt like the only real thing left. And Isabel realized something important. When everything starts to crack, you hold on to the person who knows how to survive broken things. Rain fell lightly that afternoon as Isabel sat in Jonah's car, waiting for the engine to warm. He had asked her to take it in for a tire rotation while he met with a client. She didn't ask why he couldn't do it himself. She rarely did anymore. But as she adjusted the driver's seat, something caught her eye. Half tucked beneath the passenger seat, just peeking out like a forgotten secret, was a scarf. Red silk. Expensive. She reached for it, her fingers grazing the fabric's soft sheen, and when she pulled it into the light, she saw it. Tiny gold letters stitched near the edge. AM. She stared at it for a long time. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breath didn't catch. Her eyes simply stayed fixed on the monogram, burning it into her mind. Isabel knew this wasn't lipstick anymore. This was a name. And now, the lie had a signature. She folded the scarf carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. At the tire shop, while the mechanic worked, Isabel sat in the waiting area and began scrolling through Jonah's calendar on their shared cloud. Business lunches, site visits, late-night meetings that never used to exist. She didn't cry. She didn't call Claire. She didn't even let the anger rise. Instead, something in her settled. Cold, clear, determined. When she got home, she opened an unused journal from her art studio drawer, the leather one Jonah had given her for their 8th anniversary. Ironic. She wrote the date at the top of the first page and listed what she knew. Lipstick stain on blue pinstripe shirt, red scarf, monogrammed AM found in Jonah's car, business dinner on 12th, confirmed on his calendar, but client's office is in Boston, and Jonah never flew that day. Hotel reservation confirmation forwarded to his email, deleted an hour later, retrieved from trash. The list grew slowly, over days. phone calls that ended when she entered the room, receipts tucked into pants pockets, places they had never been together, a dinner for two at a seafood place she was allergic to. At night, when Jonah lay beside her, sleeping soundly with his back turned, Isabel stared at the ceiling and let her heart grow quiet. Not dead, but awake in a new way. Each clue made her stronger, less fragile, less foolish. She began walking more, listening more, training herself to notice everything. There was power in observation. There was safety in silence. Claire noticed the change. "You're calmer," she said one morning over coffee. Not in a peaceful way, in a dangerous way. Isabel smiled faintly. "I'm just watching." Claire's eyes narrowed. "You planning something?" Isabel stirred her coffee. "Not yet. I'm preparing." At the Art Therapy Center, Isabel started a new piece. A canvas of a woman walking through a burning house, her face serene, her hands empty. She worked on it slowly, layering the flames in reds and oranges, the woman in soft gray. No one else knew what it meant. She didn't explain. On a rainy Tuesday, she followed Jonah, told him she was visiting a client. Instead, she trailed his car across town to a boutique hotel tucked away behind old brick buildings. He went in with a woman, tall, blonde, confident. Isabel stayed in her car, engine off, journal open on her lap. She didn't take a photo. She didn't need to. The image was already carved into her memory. When he returned home later that night, he kissed her on the cheek and said he was exhausted. She smiled and said, "You work so hard." In the quiet, Isabel wrote another line in her journal. Her name is Allegra Monroe. The red scarf was hers, so was Jonah. But Jonah wasn't hers anymore. Not really. What he didn't know was that Isabel had already started contacting a lawyer. A quiet woman named Marin, with soft hands and sharp instincts. Isabel didn't plan to divorce him yet. That would come later. After the ground was ready, after everything he'd taken from her was accounted for. She didn't want a scene. She wanted justice. And justice, true justice, was patient, calculated, surgical. She folded the red scarf again that night and placed it in a box marked spring scarves. And for the first time in months, she slept soundly. Jonah didn't notice, but he would. The studio had always been Isabel's sanctuary, tucked at the back of the community center, with large windows that welcomed sunlight and the distant sounds of birdsong. The walls were lined with student paintings, most of them bright, sunflowers, dancing figures, rolling hills. But something had shifted. The air now felt denser, charged, as if the room itself had absorbed the silence she carried. Isabel stood in front of a blank canvas that morning, brush in hand, her mind echoing with thoughts she hadn't spoken. She dipped the bristles into deep crimson, almost black. It was instinctive, not deliberate. Her movements were slower than before, more deliberate, like each stroke was carving something raw from inside her. She didn't paint faces anymore. She painted shadows, figures blurred at the edges, like they were trying to escape themselves. Houses with cracked foundations, birds flying with broken wings, a woman whose head had been replaced with a keyhole, but no key in sight. She never explained the images. She just painted and let the canvas scream for her. Her clients began to notice. A teenage girl who rarely spoke looked up from her own watercolors and whispered, "Miss Isabel, your painting makes me feel scared, but also safe." Another woman, recovering from emotional trauma, stood frozen before one of Isabel's newer canvases. A woman walking through a forest of eyes, each tree watching. The woman burst into tears without knowing why. "Is that what it feels like?" she asked. Isabel simply nodded. Word spread. More women began requesting sessions, not just for therapy, but to be in the presence of her art. Something about it made them feel understood without being told, without judgment, without words. But it wasn't just the women who noticed. Jonah did too. One evening, he dropped by the studio unannounced, under the pretense of picking her up. Isabel wasn't expecting him. He stood near the doorway, scanning the room, his gaze pausing on the central piece, a massive canvas she'd titled, "What You Do When No One Is Looking." It was an abstract composition, red and black bleeding into each other, with hints of gold that looked like burning lies. A man's silhouette faded into the shadows in the corner of the frame, barely visible unless you looked closely. "That's new," Jonah remarked, his voice uneasy. "You've changed your style." "I've changed," Isabel replied simply, not looking at him. He looked at her longer than usual, trying to read her face, but she gave him nothing. Her hands were covered in charcoal and paint, her hair pinned back, and her eyes no longer searching his. Later that night, he asked, "Are you angry with me?" She looked at him from across the room, her tone quiet and steady. "Should I be?" Jonah hesitated, then shook his head. "No, of course not." She didn't push. She didn't need to. Let him wonder. Let the silence do its work. In her journal, she added a new entry. "He's starting to squirm." Good. That means he feels something. Isabel began to sell her paintings under a pseudonym, just initials, IL. She didn't want recognition, she wanted freedom. Each piece that sold gave her more control, more leverage, a separate account. A new future, slowly building. Claire watched it all unfold with cautious pride. "You're turning pain into fire," she said, "but make sure it doesn't burn you too." Isabel replied, "I know exactly where to aim it." The scarf remained in its box. The journal grew heavier. The plan continued, slowly, like a song that started in whispers but was now growing louder. And the paintings? They no longer whispered. They screamed. It began with another lie. A text from Jonah, sent casually over breakfast. "I'll be in Portland for a project walkthrough. 2 nights. Don't wait up." He kissed the top of Isabel's head, already halfway out the door with a suitcase and an empty explanation. But Isabel had seen the calendar invite he forgot to delete from the cloud. Not Portland. Not a walkthrough. Instead, a reservation for 2 at Marcelina's, an upscale French restaurant downtown, tonight. A name attached, Allegra M. The initials matched the scarf. And suddenly, it wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was confirmation with a timestamp. Claire offered to come with her, but Isabel declined. This was something she had to see alone, not to punish herself, but to sharpen her clarity. That evening, Isabel dressed differently. A gray coat buttoned to the neck, no makeup, hair tied back in a loose knot. She looked nothing like the woman Jonah had married, nor the one he had slowly erased. She took Claire's old sedan and parked across from the restaurant just as twilight settled over the city. At 7:05 p.m., Jonah arrived, alone, wearing the navy suit she'd bought him 3 Christmases ago. He waited outside with that familiar charm plastered across his face, phone in hand, checking his reflection in the window. Isabel didn't blink. She watched. At 7:12, Allegra stepped out of a black town car. Tall, stunning, red lips, heels too high for a weekday. She walked like the world owed her something, and the world agreed. Jonah lit up. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, twice. He looked at her like Isabel hadn't seen in years. They were seated at a candlelit table by the window. Isabel could see them perfectly. The wine, the shared laughter. Jonah reaching across the table to hold her hand. At one point, Allegra pulled out her phone and showed him something. He laughed so hard, he threw his head back. He had never laughed like that with Isabel in the past year. At 8:03, a waiter brought out a small cake with a gold candle. Jonah clapped softly, and Allegra leaned in to blow it out, eyes sparkling. Isabel's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Her body trembled, but her face stayed still, cold, focused. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, but something shifted in her chest. It wasn't grief anymore, it wasn't confusion, it was death, a death of the last flicker of loyalty she had clung to. And in its place rose something colder, smarter, unforgiving. By 8:45, they exited hand in hand. Jonah hailed another car. He kissed Allegra again, longer this time, fingers brushing her cheek. Then he helped her into the back seat and climbed in beside her. The car pulled away. Isabel didn't follow. She sat there until her breath steadied, until her heartbeat slowed. The pain was real, but it was clean now, like a wound no longer festering. She drove home in silence, parked in the driveway, and walked inside. Claire met her at the door, eyes searching her face. "Did you see?" Isabel nodded. "Yes. Do you want to talk?" "No," Isabel said. "I want to work." She went into her studio. Midnight blue filled the canvas, not with peace, but with the weight of midnight itself. She painted Allegra's silhouette, beautiful, haughty, untouched, and beside her a house burning in the background. The man inside was faceless. When the painting dried, she didn't title it. She didn't need to. It wasn't art, it was evidence. The next morning, she made Jonah's breakfast like always, plated it carefully. Toast, eggs, black coffee. He walked in wearing a smile, kissed her cheek, and said, "Trip went well, productive." Isabel smiled back. "I'm glad." He didn't notice her eyes. How still they had become, how sharp. The betrayal was complete. The next step wasn't rage, it wasn't confrontation, it was dismantling, one careful piece at a time. The rain had returned, soft and steady, tapping against the windows like a quiet metronome. Isabel sat curled in the corner of the living room couch, her journal resting closed on her lap. Across from her, Claire sat with her legs tucked under her, fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. The evening was still, heavy with something unspoken. "Do you remember," Claire began suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper, "when we were teenagers and I used to dream about living in Italy?" Isabel looked up. "You talked about it constantly." "I made it there, you know," Claire said, a sad smile flickering. "Lived in Florence for a year, taught English, fell in love." Isabel hadn't heard this version before. She nodded, cautious. "His name was Matteo. He was charming, sophisticated, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought." Claire swallowed, her throat tight. "I thought I'd found my forever." Isabel sat up straighter. "But after a year, things changed, slowly. The same way they change for you, I think. Less eye contact, shorter kisses, excuses, delays." Claire paused. "Then one day I found out he'd been seeing someone else, a woman from Milan, his ex. He never stopped." "Claire," Isabel breathed. "I confronted him. He said it didn't mean anything, that I was too emotional, that I was imagining it. I felt crazy." Claire shook her head, her jaw hardening. "So I left. I packed everything and came home. But I didn't tell anyone, not even you. I was ashamed. I thought it meant I'd failed." Isabel felt her heart twist. "You didn't fail." Claire met her eyes. "Neither have you." They sat in silence, the weight of years between them thinning like fog. "I didn't come here just to visit, Izzy," Claire continued. "I came because I recognized the way you looked at the window the night I arrived. I know what it means to watch a man disappear slowly, piece by piece, and still try to hand him all your love." Isabel clenched her jaw. "I thought if I just held on, maybe he'd remember me." Claire's voice turned firm. "You can forgive the past, but you don't have to excuse the present. He knows what he's doing, and you know it too." Isabel looked down at her hands. "I don't want to be like him." "You won't be," Claire said, moving closer. "But don't mistake quiet for virtue. You've been polite while he's been cruel. That isn't balance, it's surrender." Something in Isabel cracked open, a truth she hadn't let herself say aloud. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of what? Of becoming someone else. Of losing the version of me who believed in love." Claire reached out, placing her hand gently over Isabel's. "You won't lose her. You'll just meet a version of her who knows how to protect herself." Isabel closed her eyes. That night, she sat in her studio until long after midnight. Her hands moved quickly, painting a small portrait. Two sisters standing in a storm. One facing forward, one watching her back. Neither running. She didn't sign it. The next morning, she placed it on the wall above the desk in the guest room. Claire saw it, said nothing, but when she hugged Isabel goodbye before heading to the grocery store, her voice was warm. "I'm proud of you. Even if you haven't moved yet, you're waking up." Isabel watched her walk to the car, a breeze lifting the hem of Claire's coat. She turned back into the house, closed the door behind her, and whispered to the empty hallway, I won't be quiet forever." The morning air felt colder than usual, even with sunlight pouring into the kitchen. Isabel stood at the sink, rinsing a single coffee cup, watching the water swirl before it disappeared down the drain. Jonah had already left, claiming he had a site visit in a neighboring town. She hadn't asked for details. She no longer needed to. Later that day, Isabel sat at the bank, her hands steady as she handed over the paperwork. The teller, a polite woman with silver glasses and a soothing voice, confirmed her identity, smiled, and executed the transaction without question. Within 30 minutes, half of their joint savings, money they had built together over a decade of shared accounts, plans, and broken promises, was now safely in a private account under Isabel's name. New bank, new login, new passwords, only hers. It didn't feel like theft. It felt like oxygen. That evening, she made Jonah's dinner. Roast chicken, his favorite. He complimented the seasoning and kissed her forehead. "You always take care of everything," he said. She smiled. "Of course I do." Once he was asleep, phone charging on the nightstand, face turned to the wall, Isabel unlocked his phone using the fingerprint he'd registered for convenience. She scrolled quickly, capturing screenshots, messages with Allegra, emails to hotel staff, gift receipts. Then she slipped out of the room, pulled out her laptop, and began her next move. Allegra Monroe had an art profile, not a private one, a curated page for her personal photography, full of staged, polished glamour. She posted often, enough for Isabel to learn her tone, her rhythm, and even her insecurities. So she crafted the message with precision. Using an anonymous email, she wrote, "Open quote, does he call you his muse too? Just wondering. He told me I was the only one. A friend," close quote. Then she added a screenshot, one photo, Jonah's message sent 2 weeks ago to a different woman, someone Isabel couldn't fully identify yet. But it didn't matter. She clicked send. 3 days passed before the shift came. Jonah was on the phone, pacing the hallway. His voice was quiet but sharp. "What are you talking about, Allegra?" "I didn't. No, I swear, I haven't seen anyone else." "This is insane. Look, you're being paranoid again, just like last time." Isabel passed him silently with a basket of laundry. Their eyes met for a moment. His were strained, hers were unreadable. That night, he didn't eat much, left half his plate untouched. He stared at his phone like it held secrets he couldn't decode. Isabel waited until he went to the garage to take a call. Then she slipped into his study and found his briefcase open. She took one document, a signed property agreement for an upcoming client, and quietly photocopied it using the small machine in her art room. She wasn't sure yet how she'd use it, but having it made her feel one step closer to control. The next morning, Allegra posted a cryptic photo to her social media, a shattered wine glass. Caption, "When you realize you were just one of many." Isabel bookmarked the post. The cracks were forming, not explosive, not loud, but real. Later that week, Jonah asked, out of nowhere, "Have I seemed distracted lately?" Isabel tilted her head, feigning concern. "No. Should I be worried?" He hesitated. "Just tired, I guess." "Maybe you're working too hard?" He nodded, but something in his expression shifted. Doubt, restlessness, maybe even guilt, but it was too diluted now to reach her. That night, Isabel updated her journal. Phase 2 in motion. He's off balance. Allegra's suspicious. The silence is growing teeth. And as she turned off the lights, slipping into bed beside a man who no longer knew the version of her lying beside him, she whispered to the dark, "One day soon, you'll look back and realize I was always 5 steps ahead." It began with a folder, neatly labeled, methodically organized, and quietly damning. Inside, screenshots, comparison images, dates, timestamps, and contracts. Proof that Jonah's award-winning architectural design for the Kensington Art Center bore more than a passing resemblance to a 2012 Japanese design published by a lesser-known architect overseas. He had taken the skeleton of the structure, reworked the facade, and called it original. To the untrained eye, it might pass, but Isabel knew better, and so would anyone who looked closely. She had discovered the similarities weeks ago, while browsing through old architecture publications in Jonah's office. He never locked it. He assumed she wasn't interested in his work anymore. But she had learned to stop appearing interested and start paying attention. The journalist was a young woman named Talia Ning, known for her quiet but persistent investigative writing. Isabel had read several of her exposés before, pieces about design theft, stolen patents, manipulated academic claims. She contacted Talia anonymously, sending a digital copy of the folder with a simple message. "This might be worth your time. I'd look at page 7. Within 4 days, Talia responded. One sentence, "It's not only worth my time, it's going to make the front page." On the morning the article went live, Isabel served Jonah his usual black coffee and toast. She placed his phone beside his plate, unlocked and open. He tapped through messages distractedly, not yet realizing the storm that had arrived. Then, his phone pinged. A colleague had texted him a link with one word, "Explain?" Jonah clicked. Isabel saw the change instantly, his eyes narrowing, the blood draining from his face, the toast untouched. He didn't speak as he read the article, line by line. Talia had done her job well. She had included both the visual comparison and quotes from the original architect in Osaka, who had stated he'd never granted permission. The article questioned the integrity of Jonah's firm and hinted at lawsuits and funding withdrawals. By 10 a.m., his office line rang 15 times. He didn't answer. By noon, his project's investors had suspended the final funding phase, pending investigation. Isabel spent the afternoon in her studio, humming softly as she painted over an old canvas with thick black brushstrokes. Not angry, focused. At 6:17 p.m., Jonah came home. He slammed the front door so hard it rattled the picture frames. Isabel didn't come out of her studio. He stormed in seconds later, red-faced and shaking, the article still open on his tablet. "You think this is funny?" he shouted, voice cracking. "Someone's trying to destroy everything I've built." Isabel looked at him, calm, unshaken. "I saw the article," she said evenly. "They're saying I'm a thief?" "Are you?" Jonah's eyes flared. "Don't play games with me, Isabel." She stood slowly, wiping her hands on a paint-splattered rag. "I'm not playing. I just asked a question." "I built that project from nothing." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You built it from someone else's foundation. You just hoped no one would notice." He went still for a second, then suddenly grabbed the plate on the side table and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, ceramic shards flying. The sound rang out sharp and violent. But Isabel didn't flinch, not even a blink. She stared at the broken mess on the floor, then raised her eyes to meet his. "We're just getting started," she whispered. Jonah stared at her, breath heaving. For the first time, he looked at her as if he was seeing something unfamiliar, something dangerous. He left the room without another word. Isabel stood still, surrounded by paint and silence. Her pulse was calm, her heart steady. She picked up her brush again and returned to the canvas. This painting would be called Collapse. Not about buildings, but about men who thought they were untouchable, and women who let them believe it, until they didn't. The paperwork was thick, stamped, notarized, and quietly signed in a small law office overlooking the river. Isabel didn't wear black or gray that day. She wore soft blue, like a quiet sky after a storm. Her lawyer, Marin, slid the final copy across the desk. "It's done," she said gently. Isabel nodded. No tears, no dramatic sighs, just a slow, releasing breath. She stepped out of the building, the city moving around her, unaware that something enormous had ended and something else had just begun. Within weeks, she finalized the purchase of a small, ivy-covered house on the edge of town. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but it had sunlight in every room, high ceilings, and enough space for art tables and long conversations. She named it The Foundation, not after what had been destroyed, but what could be rebuilt. There were no advertisements, just a single post on a local message board. A safe space for women healing from emotional wounds. Open doors, open hands, and slowly they came. a widow who hadn't laughed in months, a teacher who'd lost her sense of worth, a teenager who hadn't spoken since her father left. They painted. They planted herbs in the backyard. They cried without explanation. Isabel didn't fix them. She simply listened, offered tea, and made sure they knew they were not alone. One afternoon, as she was sweeping the porch, Jonah showed up. His suit was wrinkled. His hair looked unwashed. There were dark hollows beneath his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice brittle. Isabel leaned the broom against the railing. "If you're here to apologize, I've already accepted it. For me, not for you." He stepped forward. "I lost everything. The firm let me go. The investors pulled out. And Allegra, she's gone. She took the last $30,000 from my account. Vanished." Isabel said nothing. "I miss you," he added quietly. She looked at him for a long moment. "You miss the version of me who let you lie." "That's not true." "Yes, it is." She folded her arms. "You're not here for me, Jonah. You're here because the woman who burned you left fewer ashes than the one who stood beside you." His face crumbled. "Just one more chance," he whispered. "Please." Isabel stepped closer, voice low but clear. "You had years of chances. I asked you with my eyes, with my silence, with my dinners, with my forgiveness. I begged without words. You answered with absence." He stared at her as if he didn't recognize her anymore. He was right. He didn't. "I'm not angry," she added, softer now, "but I'm not yours." Jonah left that day without another word. Back inside, a young woman named Priya was painting a window on canvas, one cracked but glowing with light. "It's supposed to be your house," she said shyly. Isabel smiled. "You got it just right." That evening, she stood outside, the wind brushing through her hair, her arms crossed gently over her chest. She looked at the sign above the doorway, the foundation. It no longer reminded her of what Jonah took. It reminded her of what she'd finally built. And she knew, this time it couldn't be stolen. The afternoon sun poured through the wide windows of the foundation, casting golden light across the wooden floor. The room was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the camera crew adjusting their equipment. A young journalist from a regional arts magazine sat across from Isabel, notebook in hand, voice recorder clipped to her collar. "Tell me," she said gently, "do you ever wish things had gone differently?" Isabel smiled. Not bitter, not wistful, just honest. Sometimes you need to be broken in the right places to finally become unbreakable. The journalist paused, visibly moved. Behind Isabel, the camera captured the centerpiece of the studio, her newest painting, still fresh, still breathing. It showed a woman mid-step, walking barefoot across shattered glass. Her shoulders were back, her chin raised, her feet bloodless. She wasn't fleeing. She wasn't bracing for pain. She simply walked forward, calm, radiant, and free. Isabel didn't explain the painting. She no longer felt the need to explain anything. After the interview, she joined a group of women in the garden. They were transplanting herbs, laughing softly, dirt under their fingernails. One woman read aloud from a book of poems, while another hummed a lullaby she said she hadn't sung since she was 10. There was no therapy sign out front, no official titles, just a door that stayed open and chairs that were never empty. Claire visited every Thursday now. She and Isabel often stayed up late with mugs of tea, watching old movies, trading memories, some good, some painful, but none ignored. Their bond, once fragile, had become a lifeline, a reminder that sometimes broken sisters could still build each other back. Jonah had sent one last letter a month ago. No threats, no blame, just a short apology. Isabel read it once and filed it away in a drawer she didn't often open. Not out of hatred, but because she didn't live there anymore. Her life was no longer a house full of locked rooms. It was a garden, unpredictable, messy, and entirely hers. At a community fundraiser weeks later, Isabel stood on stage in front of over 100 people. Donors, artists, survivors, curious neighbors. She wore a simple cream blouse and jeans splattered with old paint. She wasn't a public speaker, but they listened anyway. "I used to think healing was a destination," she said, her voice steady. But it's not. It's a daily decision to wake up, to feel, to keep going even when it still hurts, and to know you're not weak for hurting. You're alive. When the applause faded, a young girl came up to her and whispered, "You're the reason my mom is smiling again." Isabel knelt, smiled back, and whispered, "Then she's the strongest woman I know." That night, as the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Isabel stayed behind in the studio, alone but never lonely. She added the final stroke to a canvas she had kept hidden for weeks. It showed a woman not defined by who left, but by what she chose to stay for. In the lower corner, she signed it with her full name for the first time. Isabel Laurent, not the perfect wife, not the silent shadow, but the woman who never lost, because she had chosen herself.